Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Aquarium's Online Academy. My name is Kaya, and I am coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And this morning, we are going to be talking all about an animal that you probably think of first when you think of visiting an aquarium. That's right, we're going to be thinking all about fish. So we are going to be talking about the features that are unique to fish and how we know we're looking at fish. And then we'll be taking a look at two different habitats in the ocean and looking at the different fish that live in both of those places and thinking about what's similar between them and what's different, what is unique to these fish in these different habitats. Now, while you're watching, I would love to hear from you. If you have a favorite fish you would love to talk about, or if you have questions about any of the fish that I'm introducing to you, please feel free to text. This is a live program. That number is 562-286-1838. And I have my colleague Erin, who is going to be passing along those questions to me and also making all of the magic happen behind me. Now, if you are not watching this live on Monday, December 6th, you are still free to reach out to us. We would still love to connect with you. So you may email us any questions or thoughts you have at live@lbaop.org, and someone from our education team will get back to you within the next week to answer those questions. All right, and with that, everyone, let's go ahead and start thinking about fish. Do you have any ideas about what makes a fish a fish? Okay, well, first, we're taking a look at a habitat, but I don't see any fish in here. Let's start by making some observations of this habitat and then thinking about what the fish might look like that live in here. If anybody has any predictions, go ahead and text in. So the first thing I'm noticing are these right here, what looks like big, tall plants. And that, my friends, is one of the fastest growing things in the ocean. That is kelp. This is giant kelp specifically because of how fast it grows. So looking at this, I'm noticing it really looks like a forest. I'm seeing lots of light coming through, and then I'm also seeing lots of shadows as well. So that might give us some clues as to what the animals might look like in here, what the fish might look like. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on this habitat, again, giant kelp, fastest growing thing, one of the fastest growing things. And this is a local habitat. So this is something that you can, if you are ever able to go snorkeling or eventually scuba diving off of our coast, this is the type of habitat you would find. And it's very unique, friends. There's only 5 places in the whole world that we can find kelp forests growing like this. Now, one other thing that I'm noticing about this kelp is it's moving. Scientists, do you see that? How it's swaying? So that tells us that out in the ocean here, there's probably lots and lots of currents that's moving the kelp. Now, the reason it is not drifting away is because it has a special feature called a holdfast, which holds on to those rocks, what we can't see down there at the bottom. And that way the kelp is able to stay anchored even if there are strong currents. So that might tell us another thing about the types of animals or fish that we might find in here. They have to be animals that are able to either withstand the currents or are maybe going to hide and use the kelp for that. So just some things to think about before we visit our kelp forest here at the aquarium. Now, I did get a text in, thank you for watching this morning, about features of fish, which is a perfect transition into looking at a fish, which is that fish have scales and gills. Excellent job. Those are 2 defining features of fish. Let's take a closer look at a fish to talk about those 2 features, and then we'll take a look at that kelp forest. Oh, wow. Look at this bright orange fish, and this is a great example of both of those 2 features. So scales, we can see all of the scales are very, very clear here. And this, by the way, is a Garibaldi, which is our California state fish because it is that golden orange, and we are, of course, the Golden State. Now, those scales are a very important adaptation for fish because that's something that helps protect them in the water. So I want you to think for a moment, have you ever gone swimming for too long or taken a bath for too long? What happens to your fingers? They become like raisins, right? They're really soft and wrinkly. That's because we are not really meant to be in water for long, extended periods of time, unfortunately, as much as we might love to swim. So scales are a protective covering that keep fish safe from any water. And it's also, they're hard, so they're a good protection against predators as well. Some fish have smaller scales, which are a little softer, but if you tap your fingernails, that might give you a good idea of what it's like to have scales covering your body. And again, they're very clear and visible on our Garibaldi here, but not all fish you can see those scales, but they are there. Now, the second feature that was brought up to us by one of our viewers is gills. So gills are how fish are able to breathe underwater. And in our fish, like this Garibaldi here, they have a covering over their gills. So that is their gills right there. That is a operculum, very fancy science word, and it's just a bony plate that keeps those gills safe. So gills are essentially like their lungs. If you all take a deep breath in and out, that is what fish are doing using their gills. So water will pass through their mouth over their gills as they're swimming, or some fish have the ability to pump water over their gills, and that is how they are able to breathe. Now, the reason that that bony flap is very helpful is because it's a very sensitive or vulnerable part of the fish. So having that flap there is extra important. And this is actually one of the differences between a bony fish and their relatives, the cartilaginous fish, sharks. So sharks are also a type of fish. They do have gills, like our leopard shark here, who is also in the same habitat as our Garibaldi. And we can see that they do have gills on the side here, but they don't have that flap covering it. So their gills are more exposed. And that is a difference between the two, even though both do have gills. Now, another difference between sharks and fish. I gave it away when I called them cartilaginous fish. And this is hard to tell from the outside, but sharks have a different type of skeleton. They have a skeleton that is made entirely of cartilage, which is like what we find in our ears and our noses. So if you feel those, you'll notice they feel really soft and flexible compared to other parts of our body. And that is one thing that allows sharks to be much bigger and much better swimmers than a lot of fish. Now, some fish are bony fish are built for swimming, but in general, we can expect more sharks to have that speed and that flexibility because of their cartilaginous skeleton. So our fish instead have bony skeletons, just like us. So often we can call them rayed fish as well. I know we have some questions coming in, but can we go back to that Garibaldi picture really quickly so we can take a look at those fins, which is maybe the easiest place to tell that they do have little bones right in there. And that is another feature of fish that we have yet to talk about, which is their fins. So this is a defining characteristic. And what do they use their fins for? To swim and to move around. Now, we can learn a lot about a fish and its behavior just by making observations of their fins. So, for example, like those sharks we were looking at, if a shark has a really tall dorsal fin, that's going to help it stay balanced, and that might let us know it's a really fast swimmer. So a fish like this Garibaldi, I do see a dorsal fin here. Although for bony fish, it tends to not be as helpful for them to swim. But that's one thing that we can look for, scientists, right? That's a clue. I'm also noticing this heart-shaped tail, which is very distinctive for Garibaldi. So that might help it swim around. And of course, they have their pectoral fins here as well, which helps them with their direction. Okay, I have some questions here about our kelp forest, which is wonderful. Maybe we can take a look at our kelp forest while I'm answering these. So one question is, are rocks always at the bottom of kelp, or can roots go in the sand? My friends, I understand why we are thinking roots, because they look a whole lot like plants. But kelp is actually a type of algae, which is like a simpler plant, and they don't have roots. So roots go into the sand, or not sand necessarily, soil usually, and they pull up nutrients, helps the plant pull nutrients from the soil. The holdfast, and I'm looking around because I do have a holdfast in here to show you. So this is a holdfast, which is going to be found right at the bottom of this kelp here. And it does look a lot like roots, right? Because it's all sort of twisty and lots of vines together. But this does not function in a way to help the kelp pull up nutrients. It just holds onto those rocks. So the answer is it might not necessarily be rocks always at the bottom of a kelp forest, but it does need to be something for that kelp to anchor onto. So it could be a reef of some kind, or maybe something else that might be at the bottom that's going to give it a nice hold, something to hold on to. But yes, the kelp is always going to be anchored onto something. If it drifts away, then that kelp is going to probably be found on our beaches. If you've ever found seaweed, that is kelp when it is living out in the ocean. And why was the Garibaldi chosen to be the state fish of California? I am not 100% sure why, but I do believe it's because it's that bright orange color, which is we are the golden state full of sunshine, and that Garibaldi represents that. So our Garibaldi is that very bright color, and yet it is found here in this habitat, believe it or not. So I think it is time for us to visit our live webcam here at the aquarium and start to see what those animals look like. Do you have any predictions of what oh, that's fine. Okay, so my friends, oh wow, we got a good view of one of our stars in here already. So this, again, my friends, is a live look at one of our exhibits here at the aquarium called our Blue Cavern exhibit, which is representing a real kelp forest habitat and dive site off the coast of Catalina. So right off the bat, we can see there's those rocks there, and we see the kelp, which is not real kelp in this exhibit because that would be very hard to maintain since it's so fast growing, but it does look awful. It gives the animals the same sense of where they are. And remember, I asked you to make some predictions of what the animals might look like, what colors they might have. And now we get a look. Is this what you expected to see? So these are our giant sea bass, which are a large, huge type of fish, which is where they got their names from. They can be up to 500 pounds, and they can be up to 5 feet tall, which is really big. You can't see how tall I am, but it's about my height. And so these are very big fish out there. And what do you notice? What patterns do you see here? So giant sea bass, I'm noticing that they have all of those spots on them. They have that nice color of gray and silver, and then they've got all of those gray spots. So that is going to help them camouflage or blend in to this habitat. If you remember from our other look at a kelp forest, there was lots of light and shadows. So the giant sea bass have those spots to help them blend in. These are predators. They are what we call an ambush predator. So if we looked at them before, we had a good look of their mouth. Oh, here we go. Oh, swimming the other way, but we can see that operculum there. It's covering their gills. So they have these big mouths, and they use them kind of like a vacuum. So they're what we consider an ambush predator because they will wait. So you can see they're not super fast fish. So here we can see that mouth right here. They'll wait, sort of hang out in the kelp, blending in, and then as something swims by that they're interested in, they will take it in with that big mouth. And so that is their strategy for hunting in the kelp forest, and those spots and that pattern is going to help them blend in. And by the way, these are all unique. So every sea bass has its own unique pattern. This is one of the ways that scientists are able to ID them when we study them out in the ocean. So this is one fish, very charismatic fish that lives in the kelp forest. Let's go back and take a look and see if we can find any other fish that are living there. Oh, so someone is asking if there's currents in this exhibit. So we don't have a current in this one, but we do have another exhibit right next door called the Amber Forest exhibit, which is another look at a kelp forest. And this one, if you take a look, you will notice those fish. Some of them are drifting, and you'll see this kelp here is also drifting. So we do have current running through this one to model a little bit more what that looks like out in the ocean. I'm pretty sure the reason we don't have it in Blue Cavern is because it's too large. And we want to make sure everyone is able to see everything in there. So this is a slightly smaller one. This is right upstairs northern Pacific. This is looking more at like an intertidal zone where we can sometimes find kelp. And you can see that we have waves coming through here to demonstrate sort of what this habitat is like. There are some fish in here as well, but you know what? I think there's doing such a good, oh, there we go. There's one right over here. And if we take a look at those colors, we can see it's going to blend in to this sort of darker habitat as well, just like the kelp forest. Now I want to take another look at our Garibaldi though, because we were talking about that color. And we can see it's such a bright orange color, very different from our giant sea bass and our leopard shark that was swimming around in there, and even that fish that we were just looking at in our intertidal zone. So why might this fish have such a bright color if it lives in such a dark and shadowy environment? And the reason why is because color is not only able to help animals camouflage, sometimes it is a form of communication. So animals, other animals, they need lots of different ways to communicate with one another. We use our voices. So animals like the Garibaldi are going to use their color and their body language as well. So what this color is telling other animals is that they are very territorial. They are protective of their home. So they are going to chase other animals away, or even scuba divers that come too close. They are going to let them know that this is their habitat and they don't, or their home, their area, and they don't want anything else coming in there. And so that's what that bright orange color, it's a little bit of a warning to other animals. In fact, in our kelp for our blue cavern exhibit, we used to have Garibaldi in there to represent, that habitat, what it looks like out in the wild, but they were chasing around our giant sea bass too much. So even though giant sea bass are much, much bigger than these Garibaldi have lots of personality, and they were becoming protective of certain areas of the Blue Cavern exhibit. So we decided to find them another home where they were not going to bother any of the other fish in that exhibit. So even small fish can have quite a personality. And I just got a question in, if fish see color, and I'm actually not 100% sure the answer. I know that stingrays can, sharks cannot distinguish color, and with bony fish, I think probably. Okay, so thank you to my colleague Erin helping me out there. So for most of them, it's similar to humans, which is pretty great vision. So they obviously have different structures that allow them to see underwater. They have almost like goggles over their eyes, but they do have very good vision. So thanks for asking a question, helping me learn out a little bit more today. Now we have been spending a lot of time looking at our local habitat, the kelp forest. Let's take a look at a different habitat in the ocean, different part of the world. Close your eyes. We are about to go to a completely different area. It's going to feel different, look different, and the fish might look different too. So we're going to start off by making some observations, and I'm okay going to any example. Oh, perfect. Wow. So first of all, scientists, I'm noticing there's already a lot more colors in here than in our kelp forest. In terms of the fish, I'm seeing lots more fish swimming around, a lot of different shapes and colors. And then if we look at the habitat, I'm seeing all of these different shapes and colors as well. Are you familiar with what kind of habitat this is? Any ideas? If so, go ahead and text in. I've been loving all of your questions. Would love to hear more. And if you are thinking a coral reef, you are absolutely right. So this is actually, I'm pretty sure, live coral that we have here at the aquarium that is found in tropical areas. It's much, much warmer. And coral reefs represent a very small portion of the ocean, only about 1%. And yet, 50% of all of the fish that we find in the ocean rely on these coral reefs. So we can see that there's a lot of diversity in these fish. Now, the first thing I'm seeing here that I just brought up is that color. So why, scientists, do we think they might have all of these bright colors? I kind of gave you a clue when I was talking about the Garibaldi. So there's a few different reasons. Number one might be to help them camouflage. So especially these fish, these are smaller reef fish, so they would probably have predators on the coral reef. So being able to blend into some of the colors here would be helpful. They also have, well, we can say so, yeah. So some of these fish have what we would consider a lateral body shaped, laterally compressed, which means as they're swimming towards you, they're really, really, really skinny. And that is going to help them maneuver through the coral and also help them hide. So we can learn a lot from a fish, also about a fish, just by observing its shapes and its colors, and its fins as well. So thank you. Here's a great example of a laterally compressed fish. This is a butterfly fish. Also very brightly colored. So those stripes are there to probably help distract predators as well. And I'm noticing a pretty distinctive feature on this butterfly fish as well. Do you see that right there? Why do you think it has a big black spot on the back of its body? This is what we call a false eye spot. So in this case, it's using its pattern and color to try and trick predators. So it is either trying to make them think that this is where their face is, and so predators will chase their backs, which allow them to swim away, or they might think it's a much larger fish than this really is. And we can see here that they even have a stripe going through their eye, which is a particular form of camouflage. And we'll see this in many, many different types of fish or other animals that live in the ocean, is having that false eye spot. And because we have such a great view of this butterfly fish, we can also see, so we can see it's got those scales, right? So that's a feature we talked about. It has that gill flap there. So those are its gills. We can see its fins. And then its mouth, it has such a distinctive, long, skinny mouth. What could it possibly eat? Not like our giant sea bass with the big, giant mouth. Teeny tiny. This butterfly fish is going to be eating plankton and pieces of algae. So it's going to be picking things off of the coral reef and other small things floating in the ocean. So having that teeny tiny mouth is going to help in that case. And this butterfly fish is also an example, again, of a laterally compressed fish. So we were looking at it from the side. If we were looking at it straight on, it would be a really skinny fish going like this. And again, that's going to help them maneuver through the coral reef. All right, and I have a question here from David. Why don't fish have teeth? Oh, excellent question, David. And I have some news for you, which is that some fish do have teeth, including one of my favorite fish that lives in the coral reef tropical environment, the parrotfish. And it got its name, the parrotfish, because of its teeth. They have really strong teeth, David. They're almost fused into what we consider a beak. That's how their teeth look and how they sort of function. And actually, pufferfish also have a very similar type of teeth as well. So some fish do have teeth. It depends on what that fish eats. And remember, sharks are also a type of fish, and all sharks have teeth. All right, so this parrotfish, why does it have this strong fused teeth? What could it possibly be eating that would be helpful for it? Well, remember, this is a fish that lives in a coral reef, and we haven't talked too much about coral, but it has a very hard skeleton. Now, parrotfish like to eat algae and the soft corals that are living in that skeleton. And as a result, they sometimes end up eating some of the coral or that hard part or the hard skeleton. So having that strong fused teeth is going to help them break through it. They even have I think it's like more teeth in their throats that are going to help them break down that coral skeleton because it's really hard. And you know what comes out once they process that coral is beautiful white sand. So if you have ever gone to a tropical beach with really fine sand, you can think of parrotfish. And here's our parrotfish smiling, giving us a nice look at those teeth there. Now, I had another question asking if there's a coral reef in California, and there is not a coral tropical reef that is here. So our water is really, really cold and full of nutrients, and that's why we find kelp here, because kelp really requires deep water, cold water with nutrients, and lots of sunlight, and that is something that we are lucky enough to have here on the California coast. Now, tropical coral is a very different type of animal. They also need lots and lots of sunlight, but they like warm water, very, very warm water. Here's another look at some coral and some coral fish. We can see it's a little shallower here than our kelp forest exhibit. Now, some kelp or coral can be found a little bit deeper, of course, but they do really need that warm water. So there is coral that can be found in deep water. There is actually deep sea coral, which is a little bit different from this type of coral, but it is still coral. And I do believe we have some of that coral that grows here in California that can be found here. So other species, but just not that tropical coral that forms those sort of that hard skeleton. So coral is actually an animal. There's lots of teeny tiny little polyps that are living inside of there. They kind of look like teeny tiny anemones. It is a colonial animal. And they have a algae that lives with them that does photosynthesis inside of them, which is why they need that sunlight. And so here's a close-up look at those little polyps. We can see their little tentacles are out, kind of like an anemone. Again, they're also relatives of jellies. So you can think of a jellyfish being turned upside down, and they are feeding right now because they're all trying to catch little plankton in the water. But deep sea coral does not have that algae. Instead, they rely entirely on their tentacles here to catch plankton floating by. Now, Camila has a question. Why do bright colors tell other fish to stay away? So this is because they're bright colors, those other animals are going to be paying attention to that. They're going to notice that. So it's telling them, oh, this is not an animal that's trying to hide. This is an animal that is communicating. So a lot of these patterns here might be helpful for communicating certain things to other animals. Another reason why animals can be very brightly colored is to warn other animals that they are poisonous or venomous and not to come near them. Since that is their defense or form of defense, they would want to let other animals know so they don't have to worry about running away or swimming away and hiding. So that is one reason why those bright colors are a form of communication. Do we have any pictures of a tang, a pallet tang? So another fish that lives in the coral reef that I wanted to talk a little bit about the color for. Do you recognize this animal? I'm sure you do. You might be saying, that's Dory, Miss Kaya. So Dory is a type of fish called a pallet tang or a tang. And tangs actually have a spine right here at the back of their body, right at their tail, that they will put out and use if they are feeling threatened. So it's a really sharp spine. And so many tangs have very bright colors at the back of their bodies to warn other animals that they do have that there. So that we can kind of see it right here. But otherwise, there might be other reasons for having those bright, bright colors. So thanks for all of your questions. I love them. I see we have a few more, then I'll wrap up our class today. We can take another look at, so with Dory here, with our pallet tang here, we can't see her scales as clearly, but we can see her gills right here. And then she has a teeny tiny mouth as well. So what does that tell us? Is she a predator like a giant sea bass? Nope. This is another fish that eats algae that would be growing off of the coral reef. And perfect that I'm talking about what our pallet tang here eats, because room 12, hello room 12, thank you for tuning in, is wondering, what do fish eat? And it depends on the kind of fish. Fish eat all sorts of things, my friends. We have some fish that eat plankton, so really small things drifting through the water. We have fish like our tang here that is an herbivore that eats algae and other plants life found in the ocean. We have predators, fish that are predators like our giant sea bass, which will eat other fish or other invertebrates that they can find. We have some fish that are very specialized in eating certain things like our parrotfish, which can process coral to eat the algae and coral that's growing there. So there are so many different things that fish eat depending on what kind of fish we're talking about. They are one of the most diverse groups of animals on the planet. They are, in fact, we have more fish. They're the, what do I want to say, most populous vertebrate group in the world. So thank you all so much for tuning in to learn about fish with me this morning. I hope you enjoyed exploring those 2 habitats. And if you are watching with a class, thank you so much. And if you could text in how many students are in your class that we're watching this morning, we would love to know. We do love keeping track of that. And otherwise, we hope to see you on Wednesday morning. We'll have programs again at 9 and 10 a.m. And our Wednesday program at 10 is in Spanish. So please spread the word if you know any students that would love to watch a Spanish program. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and hopefully we will see you on Monday. Thank you all.